Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
In our journey to understand the relationship between economy and society in India, we have so far talked about how caste system has been influenced, and in turn has influenced the economic processes. I have not really laid much emphasis on the way economic processes are influenced by the caste system, but I have just hinted at it. I have said that because castes tend to monopolize certain occupations and certain professions, it is likely that the monopolistic situation would prevail, and monopolies, as you know, prevent competition and ensure that the productivity is reduced in various varieties. All right, but I should also mention here that this kind of caste mobilization, all right, this kind of effect on caste is also nowadays showing certain negative trends which are affecting economic performance. I don't have to go too far to illustrate my points. For instance, the kind of incidents that have occurred in recent times, of caste clashes between the Dalits and the dominant caste. This is particularly virulent. This is virulent all over India, and in different parts of the country, it has taken different shapes. In Tamil Nadu, inter-caste violence has become so bitter that there have been atrocities, incidents of caste rioting and atrocities, especially in the 1990s, which not only, it was like communal conflagration. Sometimes these caste rivalries were so intense that even the members of minority communities, even the Muslims, were targeted, because Muslims also become a caste, are treated as a caste in those regions, and there have been flare up of communal violence, which of course is a negative trend, because it constrains national productivity, it constrains economic growth. You also know that incidents where Dalits were beaten up, where that occurred, and then the incidents of retaliation by some castes in regard to reservation policies, in the mobilization of Marathas, which was of course peaceful, and then the mobilization of Patels in Ahmedabad. You also, they have led to not only loss of public property, more importantly, they are sort of contributing to the alienation of certain castes from the system, polarization of certain castes from the system. And what's very important here for us to recognize is that the economic development has taken today a a sharp turn. That sharp turn, is in terms of the liberal economic reforms. When I am referring to liberal economic reforms, of course, I refer to the changes to the sharp change in the direction of our economic policy since 1991, when market driven economy became the major principle of governance. Now, these liberal economic reforms, it was hoped, would tend to dissolve the monopolies of privileges that are found all over the country in the economic system, and it will bring in the winds of competition, because Indian firms have to compete with firms from abroad. Then what will happen is that out of sheer force of competition from the foreign companies, Indian companies also will start becoming competitive, and this competition, the force of competition will ensure all round will ensure that there will be recruitment, there will be more, and the economy will open up, there will be more jobs created, there will be search for the best persons, best most qualified people available, and so on. Therefore, there will be a real economic churning process that will go on, which will in turn liquidate the caste system, caste and community identities. But what we are finding today is not according to what was expected to happen. Why we should I want to point out why this is the case. I want to analyze why this has been the case. Why castes, not just castes, why is it that our economy is not able to fulfill its potential? This is the point that I want to highlight today. That will take me to the question, to the issue of corruption. We will have to talk about corruption that has become a big balloon, big problem in our country. What is corruption? Many people, there are definite definitions of corruption, and of course, there is the Anti-Corruption Act, which gives a specific definition of corruption as any public official who uses his position who leverages his position to give benefits, all right, which are not warranted to other parties, all right, then that is corruption. And this Anti-Corruption Act also does not only holds the bribe taker as corrupt, it also considers the bribe giver also as as violating the Corruption Act. Having said that, corruption has become a major phenomenon. We have been hearing various scams, and these scams should not actually happen in a market oriented economy, because market determines the price of everything. Why should these scams keep occurring? Now, to understand that, the politics of scams, we should go to the notion of primitive accumulation. The primitive accumulation is a concept is a concept that Karl Marx evolved, and it still is valid in our contemporary context. How is that valid? You see, primitive accumulation refers to a phenomenon of actually to briefly say, it is loot. You see, when there are, especially in the context of natural resources of various kinds, where you cannot price, how can you price the value of of land, of water? It's all, you can price it, but in the control of, in the case of mines, land and water, and air, and then spectrum waves, this that we 2G, 3G, 4G, and now they are talking about 5th generation spectrum waves, which are necessary for mobile phones and digital communications. All these are natural resources, are not owned by anybody. So, it is collectively owned. It is always difficult to price these national assets. What happens is that when you need many coal mines, therefore you give you authorize some people to you authorize some parties to take over the use of certain vast areas of forest. You can't have mines. Mining requires heavy investments, and you can't just concentrate on, you can't give out in small parcels of land. So, you have to give out vast acres of, large numbers of acres of forest land for mining corporations to develop. Or for instance, while digging wells in the sea, you will have to give it out to people who can develop. Of course, the state, the public sector corporations can also develop these things, but always public sector corporations are tend to be less productive and less competitive oriented than private sector. So, when in context of land, irrigation, in the context of building dams and canals, in the context of mines and so on, there is a vast possibility for those who are in positions of political power to misuse them, misuse their power to buy, to get this access to these resources at low prices, and then sell off this use of these to others at a higher price. This is sheer speculation, and this process of, and because of this process, what has happened is that people, very many shrewd political leaders have been able to distribute these national assets in a way that has enabled enabled them to multiply their wealth overnight, and that too for not really undertaking any productive effort, because they were privy to certain bits of information, because they were in power. They can misuse it. The bureaucrats as well as politicians can join together, and together with some businessmen, they can do this kind of, they can buy at low prices, they can get licenses to operate at low prices, and then subsequently use their licenses to exploit, to give it to sell it to others at a higher price, at a higher premium. So, this process of primitive accumulation, whether it is in oil, recently in Saudi Arabia, there was the new prince who has taken charge of Saudi Arabian government. There was it was reported that he arrested several of his own kin because on charges of corruption, and he was able to extract from them a large sum of money before as compensation to release them. So, it is wherever these natural resources are involved, there is the possibility of primitive accumulation, which actually drives the system of capitalism. I have not yet talked about capitalism. That is, capitalism is, in one word, a system which is dominated by capital. That is, capital is the means by which you can invest and produce more commodities, more goods. And the person who has capital, is able to get to give a simple example, if you have capital, if you have a large factory, then you can ensure that that factory is has managers, has workers, and you can ensure a strict discipline in the work of the factory, and make sure that the workers in fact in some of these companies, if you just go to Gurgaon, you will find that in many of these larger industrial establishments, car manufacturing establishments, or refrigerators, or televisions, or what have you, what you will find is in these factories the workers' life is regimented. That is that even their break for going to the urinals is limited to 5 minutes or 2 minutes, what have you, and even the lunch break is limited to half an hour or 1 hour. So, whatever it is a regimented life, and in capitalism this kind of coercion by capital on labor prevails. And in capitalism, the means of production are owned or become the private property. Private property prevails. Private property is property that you can buy and sell. All right, you have complete rights over. If you have private property of an acre of land, you have complete rights over that acre of land. You can do what you want with it. If you don't want to grow anything, it's up to you. If there are lots of trees, you want to cut them down, that it's up to you. It was not always the case. In our traditional system, there were what's called usufruct rights. You have for natural resources, even in our tribal cultures, we have that. They consider the forests as their community collective property, and what they do is you can use the trees, the leaves of the trees, or the fruits of the trees, or small branches of the trees. You have right to collect, but you have no right to cut out the tree. The tree is supposed to pass on from one generation to another. This is usufruct rights. All right. Even similarly, many of the common village commons used to be collectively owned, and only people had only rights to use the resources, but not to sell it off, or to cut the trees, or to deplete the resources that were available. Be that as it may, so in this kind of a private property, this is called capitalism, And because of in this system of capitalism, when it is combined with primitive accumulation, it provides a fertile ground for corrupt practices to thrive. And it is not a surprise that when after the government introduced liberal economic reforms, our capitalist system, they say we have become a crony capitalist system. Crony capital, that is, that only friends of certain people have got the advantage of economic advantage that competition opened up. All right. Now, this corruption has become a major issue. Corruption has also become a major issue for yet another reason. That is that there is the rise of the middle classes. Right? I will be talking about middle classes also subsequently, and then I want to today emphasize on the way in which corruption is made, the society is made to accept corruption. That is through the strategy of what I call populism, political populism. All right. I use the term populism in a negative sense, in a pejorative sense, because I want to distinguish populism with popular politics. All right. Now, it is important for me to discuss what is the distinction between populism and popular politics. I do not think a satisfactory definition of popular politics can be provided right away. I want to make a distinction between populism and popular. What is populism? What is popular politics? Popular politics is when the interests, popular interests of the community of citizens are addressed, because the interests of the popular interests are communicated through the political representatives, and they become very important. For instance, the interest, for instance, pollution of our metropolitan cities, congestion of traffic in metropolitan cities, in various towns and cities, are all popular, are all part of popular politics, because these are all citizens' urges, citizens' wishes, that the people who govern them address those wishes. All right. Now, in Bengaluru city, one of the main problems of Bengaluru city is that of there are so many problems. One of the major problems of Bengaluru city is garbage disposal. All right, because garbages are strewn at every street corner, and people, the municipality is not effective and efficient to collect garbage and clean the cities. And there is a deliberate and the municipality has a vested interest in not doing it, because the collection of garbage, is also garbage has become wealth producing in very many ways, and is controlled by mafias, is controlled by certain vested groups, antisocial groups, which thrive on not keeping the city clean, because if the municipality doesn't do it, the municipal workers don't do it, the municipality has to give out contracts to private parties to come and clear the garbage. All right. So anyway, so this I'm deviating into the issue of corruption here, but what I want to mention is that politics it should be popular. All right, and it's very difficult to say where popular politics begins and where populism and where it ends in populism. But for me, populism is when there is an attempt made a cynical attempt made to use popular sentiments to create what they call vote banks. All right, and this is a very as I said, it's a very problematic issue to distinguish what is populism and popular politics, but there are some instances which can clearly be said to be instances of populism, right? And some instances where one cannot be so clear, but there is a good deal of probability that many of the popular measures that a government undertakes to when the elections are about to begin, all right, elections are approaching, are tend to be populist. All right. And another I want to say that populism is taking a very different populism also is changing in its color. But anyway, one example, I think one unambiguous example I can give about populism is when political parties announce just before elections that they are going to give color television sets, all right, to everyone, distribute color television sets to everyone, or mixies to everyone when they come to power. All right. Now, this is one extreme example which actually highlights a populist ethos. All right. And similarly, nowadays they are also, of course, if you talk about distribution of laptops, all right, then it can be a disputed area, because laptops are also, it's a urgent, it's if you distribute laptops, it will promote education of young students and children. All right. So it need not be a populist measure, but if it is, I tend to be suspicious of such measures if they are announced, especially when elections are anticipated. So that is one, populism or measures which are announced when the elections are anticipated. That is my definition of populism. It's a crude definition, but it has very interesting consequences. That's why. Now, it's very interesting that the trend towards populism started way back in 1967 with the person who invented the term Garibi Hatao, that is Indira Gandhi. It's she who introduced a form of popular politics, which ensured that her party came to power. I won't call it populism, right, but it was a very political shrewd political move at that time, because when she came to power, of course she did this mainly because there were internal dissensions in her political party and her position was being threatened, therefore she did it. But what is very interesting is that 15 years of planning in the country, even the third 5-year plan, the socialist plans were failing, all right, and there was the poverty was not really disappearing, and there was a great, and there was food, there were widespread food shortages all over the country, acute food shortage, and therefore people were disillusioned, and she sensed the popular sentiments of the people and said and used the slogan Garibi Hatao, which brought her, skyrocketed her into the parliament, with a big, huge thumping majority. When she came to power, all right, she introduced varieties of programs aimed at the abolition of poverty, all right. She started, there were, loans at concessional, she nationalized the commercial banks, 10 top commercial banks she nationalized, and she use those national banks to lend loans at low rates of interest to the so-called poor people, all right. She, apart from loans, she promised them various programs of distributing land, various programs of distributing houses and so on to the poor. So that during those days the slogan was Roti Kapda aur Makan. Somehow if people are given food, shelter, food, clothing and shelter, they will be happy. And there were several new programs for poverty eradication, like gifting of buffaloes, gifting of what's that, sewing machines and so on to the poor, in order to help them lift them above the poverty line. Now this strategy that she introduced, all right, was a greatly, was a big winning strategy. All the other political parties, what she did was to set the agenda for others to follow. What Indira Gandhi did was that she set the agenda for other political parties to follow, and as a consequence, all the other parties started competing. If that party gives you this much, we will give you more. And there was what shall I say, there was this competitive politics ensured that escalation of the offers that these political parties made, if of the promises that the political parties made to the electorate, if they come to power. And they also started thinking of new programs. In Karnataka, during that time, during the Chief Minister of Devaraja's, extensive land reforms were carried out, extensive pro-poor programs, housing and housing program and various other programs for the urban poor and for the rural poor were initiated. Now, this approach was carried on by by different state governments also, or the that is announcing free rice to the 1 rupee per kilo of rice to the poor, and in midday meal program in schools, and food for work programs. All these things were the offshoot of Indira Gandhi's strategy of poverty eradication. Right? Now, politically, it was a win-win situation for the political parties. One, in the name of poverty eradication, they can divert huge amounts of public resources to these programs, all right, and even as they do it, they make sure that the that the voters vote for them and they become popular leaders. There were several, one can give examples of several popular leaders both at the state level and at the level of the center that have emerged, all right. But at the same time, they were these, because they were assured of their political position, they were also able to ensure that the public funds, they are able to use these public funds for private profit. This is using of public funds for private profit is an instance of corruption. I was saying that populism, these kinds of popular programs, whether you call it populism or popular, ultimately it is the end result that matters. These programs, when you pump in huge resources, one or two things happen. One is this, the resources that are pumped into in the programs are, as you channel these resources to the popular programs, all right, then you also ensure that on the way these resources are drained by the middlemen. This was the case with our universal rationing scheme that the government had introduced. Everyone was entitled to a certain quota of food grains, all right. So, what happened was that the middlemen who transported food from the Food Corporation of India godowns to the shop ultimately ensured that all the high quality food or high quality grains go to the private market and they make money, make extra money from the private traders, and only inferior quality of food grains would reach the end users, all right. This used to be the case. I mean, this is, you see, this is, there is an economist von Hayek who said this: if you interfere with the market system, if you introduce a rationing system, that is the sure way. If you introduce any prohibition of sale or purchase in the society, what will happen is another clandestine market is created for that item. You may create scarcity by saying that food should not should not go into the market. A certain amount of food should come to the government outlets. The moment you do that, you are making sure that that food grain becomes scarce and its price shoots up, and somebody who has the smartness to evade government control and divert these food supplies to the private the traders will make huge enormous profits. All right. This is always the case, and this is also the case with prohibition. When liquor consumption is completely prohibited, as it is now in Bihar. What is surprising is that Bihar government is so good at the implementation, not many cases of smuggling is coming out. But definitely these kinds of programs, when governments interferes, it ensures that there is smuggling, there is criminal activity, right? There is also funds are leaked out, and for a variety of reasons, these funds, the money that goes into these people's hands, they also are what shall I say, are closely linked to the political leaders, or become political leaders themselves, because they have so much money to spend in elections, that an evil nexus between politicians and bureaucrats and businessmen develops, right, which ensures that ultimately production is, productive capacity of the country is reduced. That is one. Second, this also allows the politicians to, if you are concentrating on poverty eradication programs and do, and perform on that ground, you gain a reputation that you are pro-poor, you can also ensure that the other sections, those who own capital, also give your political party funds to win the elections, all right, and some of those funds may again be leaked out into the private hands of certain politicians. So anyway, when what I am trying to say is, this entire system becomes from popular democracy, it becomes populist democracy. There is a tendency for it to become populist democracy. Okay? Popular democracy tends to become populist democracy. When this trend occurs, then it also reduces constraints the capacity, the potential of the country for growth, because why? What is wrong with corruption? What is wrong with corruption is that the money that's accumulated may not stay within the country. That's one. And even if it stays within the country, it may go into consumption of, it may increase inequalities, all right. It may promote greater inequalities, no. You see, the idea is very interesting. On the one hand, you introduce these popular programs in order to reduce inequalities. On the other hand, the programs are such that is going to promote inequalities, because some people come into, get into their hands vast amounts of resources, public resources. It's they who can spend. So what happens? The market gets distorted. It's very simple. Market gets distorted. Example, for instance, the demand for luxury housing in the country had skyrocketed before this demonetization. All right, and of course, that one of the promises of Achhe Din that was made by the NDA regime, by our Prime Minister, is that he will curb money laundering and black money that is sitting in uh, foreign commercial banks. He said that if all that money that's there is brought back, there will be, India will be, will have unprecedented economic growth. According to, it said that according to one estimate, if all the money that's, locked up in various commercial banks in secret accounts in offshore islands, that to the tune of 1.5 trillion rupees, dollars, if they are brought back to the country, then there is no need for taxation. Not only that, it is said that corruption is the source of inefficiency. If government officials, for instance, if they are efficient, the government officials are interested in not working, in remaining in ensuring that they don't work, they don't push files on time, and they don't serve the people effectively, so that they can target their services to the people who will reward them handsomely. All right. So it breeds efficiency. This is what the Aam Aadmi Party's leader highlighted in one of his earlier, when in the Anna Hazare campaign. This was what was brought out. When it was said that because of corruption, the government utility services, electricity services are inefficient, because of the collusion with big firms which are producing, which are involved in distribution of electricity. Because of that, the electricity bill that common citizens face is huge, and so on. And then in fact, that in that Nirbhaya case, commenting on that Nirbhaya case, a political leader said that the police, why should the police catch these thieves, catch these people, rapists? In fact, if they don't catch them, then they can later extract more money from the people who are sheltering these rapists and antisocial elements and criminals. So it said that this kind of popular politics at some level tends to become populist and tends to promote corruption, tends to balloon corruption. When corruption becomes bloated, then economic growth is constrained. Right? I said that how I have to elaborate a little more about this particular issue, because there are some people who say, what's wrong with corruption? Corruption, if it feeds the economic machine, if people, if private enterprises go and bribe some government officials to get their jobs done because they are in a hurry, so more buildings are built and so on and so forth. That's the argument. There will be, of course, there are some of my colleagues, some of my friends give me examples. They say, talking about corruption in Karnataka, I'm told that Karnataka is the, in Karnataka, corruption has reached, new record levels of corruption. I'm yet to, I don't have facts and figures to prove it, but definitely there is, a widespread feeling, widespread popular notion that there is pervasive corruption in right from the petty bureaucrats to the highest levels. In fact, in Karnataka, what I should mention here, the entire, recently the government last year, that is, the government had to stall a program of building steel bridges on a critical road which was linking the airport to the city. And the citizens, one of the citizens, popular comments that were being made at that time was that these steel overbridges were being built in order to favor certain contractors who were interested in building these bridges. I do not know how far that is true, but it gives rise to these suspicions, which itself alienates the people from the political system. Right? That's a very important point that we should keep in mind when we are talking about the effects of corruption. Now, second point is that as I said, when the income distribution is skewed, then so is the market. There are demand for luxury goods, luxury cars, all right. There are demand for luxury, these palatial homes, palatial, flats, all right. And whereas for the poor there will be no because the demand for houses for the poor is limited, because they cannot afford to buy these things, buy these flats, and the price of construction of flats goes up for the poor, because the rich are willing to pay any price for the buildings they build. So what happens is that the supply of housing for the poor is diminished as compared to the demand, whereas the supply of housing for the rich increases. Similarly, cars and all the so-called luxury goods. The people who make money in corrupt ways. What do? They go out on cruises, holidays abroad, and they spend their money. They spend their money on jewelry, on keeping bars of gold in their bank lockers. All right, they spend money on lavish weddings, all right. The Great Indian Wedding, there was a film that portrayed that Indian with the opulent Indian weddings, all right. So they spend money in these directions. So when they spend money in these directions, the potential for the economy to grow, economy grows, but in a stilted, distorted form. If it will grow much faster and much more quickly if if there is no corruption, because if it's a genuinely demand driven economy, then what happens is that there will be all round growth, and inequalities won't increase. Inequalities tend to get depressed, right. So what I am trying to point out is that our economic processes, economic development processes over time, encouraged populist politics to such an extent that it promoted corruption. It promoted corruption in such a way that the full potential of economic growth could not be realized. So, I am trying to point out that how the economic processes are affecting society and how social and political processes are affecting the economy as well. Friends, this economics of corruption that I have laid out, one of the laid out brings me to a particular notion that has become popular in the world of social sciences. This notion is called this concept is called the concept of passive revolution. The argument is that in India, revolutions cannot occur. Whenever it occurs, it only leads to a kind of a stagnant situation. Now, I think it's time that we divert our attention to contemporary situation to find out whether we are moving away from this line of passive revolution. That will be done in the subsequent lectures. Thank you.